So many white conservatives are furious that Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk are talking down to them the same way they've all talked down to Black people, especially as it relates to conversations about affirmative action these past few years. For context, when I was a student at Yale, I studied this exact dynamic extensively and even wrote an op-ed about it in the Washington Post. And it's so interesting to see both sides of this so-called Republican Civil War implode over ideologies that we've been warning everyone about for years. And to clarify, on one hand, native-born American workers are told that they're too culturally deficient to compete in the job market. They're being told to ignore systemic problems like the failing education system, hyper-capitalist hiring practices that prioritize cost-cutting over worker well-being, and the lack of investment in societal infrastructure and resources that would increase pathways to upward mobility. And instead, they're being told that rooting for the wrong TV characters and wanting to have a prom queen is the reason they're not eligible for competitive job opportunities. And it's rich because when we argued that systemic barriers need to be removed for Black and brown communities, these same conservatives dismissed us. They claim that discrimination doesn't exist, that America is more or less a perfect meritocracy, and that Black people just need to stop being lazy and quit listening to rap music to be successful. And now they're being hit with the same asinine rhetoric about culture that they once weaponized. And on the other hand, we're seeing overt racism and xenophobia being directed at Vivek Ramaswamy and, very unfortunately, the entire South Asian community writ large. From the Great Replacement theory to blatantly racist memes, these attacks show how deeply entrenched American racism still is today. But of course, when we were all warning about this before, Vivek Ramaswamy was one of the main people playing it down. In a prior situation where conservatives circulated a meme of him dressed up as a 7-Eleven worker, he went on a podcast and laughed it off. And then he practically called the people that were offended and trying to defend him too woke, saying it was just a harmless joke. And now he's facing an intensified version of the prejudice he helped excuse, and he's spiraling. Trump isn't even in office, and yet the conservative movement is already fracturing under the weight of its own contradictions. And both sides of this issue are reaping what they've sown. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments.
As of today, what is today? Day 6, day 7? Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk are still being dragged by the MAGA nuts. And so Vivek Ramaswamy is out there trying to switch the narrative, trying to sick the base back on to Black people. So he put this out there: end affirmative action. America is the land of meritocracy. Somebody let Vivek Ramaswamy know that white women are the highest beneficiaries of affirmative action. And you can also let Vivek Ramaswamy know that we see what he's trying to do. He's trying to sick a rabid base that's currently tearing his ass up. He's trying to sick them on to Black people. Black people ain't got nothing to do with this.
Nothing to do with it. Welcome to Let It Be Known. We got Lauren with us today. Good morning, Lauren.
Hey, how you doing? How's it going?
Good. We're gonna talk a little bit about some year-end stuff, but we got some news to start with. Lauren, a federal appeals court rejected Donald Trump's attempt to overturn a jury's verdict last year that found he sexually abused writer E. Jean Carroll in the mid-1990s. The Second U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals decided Trump has not demonstrated that the district court erred in any way, Trump has not carried his burden to show that any claimed error or combination of claimed errors affected his substantial rights as required to warrant a new trial. Basically, bottom line is that Trump will certainly go into office as an adjudicated sexual assault person, individual, or whatever. That's really, it says a lot. That I think it says a lot. What does Lauren Burke say?
Yeah, well, we sort of, I guess, knew that when he first got adjudicated on the, 34 counts. So given the jurisdiction and given the amount of effort put in by Roberta Kaplan and everybody else, it doesn't surprise me that they won on appeal. I think she won it was an $83 million award, which is interesting. Usually you have to prove to the court that your damages are worth $83 million. I'm not certain how E.G. and Carroll did that. That's a huge amount of money that I don't think I've ever heard before in terms of that type of settlement, but she won. They had a Democratic donor funding the case. Roberta Kaplan, of course, is one of the founders of Time's Up, which is effectively the now defunct Time's Up, but effectively the Me Too adjacent organization, because Time's Up and the National Women's Law Center and Me Too are really the same thing. So at any rate, it is interesting the silence from those people who were so loud in 2019 and 2018 on this case and the Pete Hegseth situation, where he did have a woman actually filed to the police a rape allegation. One would think that you would have seen the same cast of characters, Karen Tumulty and Ruth Marcus, and those people talking endlessly about this. And I'm a little surprised they're not, but because it does look like Pete Hegseth will get confirmed as the defense secretary. So it's interesting how times change from what they were when Me Too first started in 2017, 2018. It's kind of quiet now. It's sort of unusual.
Yeah. Michelle Madison says, "Good morning, Lauren." And Austin says, "Always great to see Lauren." Then he throws in the little caveat so that I won't get on his case. He says, "You too, Stacy." So,
Yeah.
boy, another morning, the last morning of the year, and some more news, Lauren. A 15-year-old white boy has pleaded guilty to trying to drown a black teen in a Cape Cod pond while spewing racial slurs as his friend laughed and called the victim, quote, George Floyd, because he couldn't breathe. The tormentor was John Sheeran, who was 14 during the July 2023 attack. He threw rocks at his 15-year-old victim and forced him to enter the pond, then shoved the boy's head under the water while calling him the N-word, according to prosecutors. Sheeran pleaded guilty to charges of attempted murder and assault with a dangerous weapon at Barnstable Juvenile Court, where a judge may choose to sentence him as an adult. So, goodness grief. We at the top, we was talking about, at least the video was telling us about the America's racism, Vivek Ramaswamy and company. But things like this tend to fly under the radar a little bit when it comes to racism as a whole. But when you're teaching your 14-year-old and younger to be so hateful just because somebody's skin color, this is the result, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we know more about these things than we did when they probably were happening, before. But now, with the technology that we have, you learn a lot more about what's going on all around the world. I gotta say, I'm not particularly excited about trying children as adults. That does typically go. That typically happens to Black youth. But whether black or white, I just think it's a terrible idea because kids tend to do stupid things that they don't realize that they don't realize the full parameters of what they're doing. 15, 16 years old, but clearly he's been adjudicated. I'm surprised the New York Post brought it up, because the New York Post
So
doesn't.
did I.
Yeah, they did not like to center. They also have the New York Post actually too in the last week has prominently featured the Robert Brooks, I would say, murder, even though that hasn't been adjudicated as a murder yet, effectively a lynching of somebody at a incarceral facility. But I was surprised to see New York Post bring that up as well. So I don't
And have
know.
you read I'm sorry, if you read
Uh,
the Post article, I was looking for the other shoe in the
Right,
article, and it never came. I was
right.
so surprised. So what you're saying, and even like you said, the Robert Brooks thing, that surprised me too, because they're just straight reporting it.
Yeah, they did straight report it, which for them is that's like a major change, because usually what they do is they try to say that some black person who's been murdered, it was actually their fault. That's usually where
Exactly.
they go. Somebody did something that caused their own death is the New York Post's favorite thing, but they didn't do that. They just wrote what happened. There's really no denying what happened because it's all on video, which is
They tend to
part of.
deny stuff that really happened, though. You know that.
Yeah, absolutely. What's creepy about the Robert Brooks situation is that the killing of Robert Brooks all happens on video. The people in the video realize the video is rolling and yet are not changing their behavior. It was the same thing with Eric Garner. They knew that the fellow was standing there with the camera. Same thing with George Floyd. They saw the lady standing there with the camera, and somehow or another, it never occurs to anybody it might be a bad idea to be doing this
Oh,
on camera.
initially, from what came out of the attorney general's office on that is that they thought the cameras were off. They thought they thought they turned the camera off, but they turned only the audio off. And I didn't ever realize that there was like two buttons, one for audio and one for video. Why would
Yeah,
that be?
I didn't either. I think different body camera systems have different protocols. I suspect they're not all the same in all jurisdictions, but that is easy to, I mean, that is interesting to know. But the impunity, the matter of factness, you know, it kind of reminds me of the Tariq Hill stop of Tariq Hill, who plays for Miami Dolphins, of course, was stopped for a game by some cop that had a long record, 27-year-old veteran who had a long record of abuse and complaints from the public. It's the same thing with this Robert Brooks situation. These people have these long records of complaints and everybody ignores it. At some point, somebody's got to be responsible for that. But I'm not sure why the Black community should sit still and watch these types of videos year in and year out with no strong reaction.
Yeah, it's true because I saw Al Sharpton put out a statement. I didn't see anyone else put out a statement on Robert Brooks. Did you?
No, that's not surprising. I mean, to me, the NAACP should just have a ready-made statement in which they can just switch the names out, because all these cases are generally
Yeah.
the same, you know. And this is the state acting. This is your taxpayer dollar at work, which is why it was sort of shocking when the conversation happened in part with the defund movement. Of course, Black advocates were told to shut up about defund, but this is why they shouldn't necessarily shut up about defund. I mean, I know it has to be articulated and marketed properly. I get all of that. But when your tax money and you're paying taxes into that, what we just saw on video, you got to question it. And I don't know how you don't question it. And if you were in any other group, whether it be white women or anything else, I mean, I always say to white women, my white female friends, you know, I'm sure that you're understanding what the patriarchy is and what misogyny is and what that history means. It means something to have a history of misogyny and patriarchy. And so you know that it does rear its head present day in certain actions. And certainly with regard to our country's history, it means something that there are all sorts of history that goes back 400 years that is particularly aggressive toward Black men. And it shows up present day. And for people in these groups not to mention it is outrageous. And then for Black people, when we mention it, it's basically shut up and go away. You're going to lose us elections if you keep talking about this. Well, okay, then fix the problem and we won't keep talking about it. Like, so it's this endless loop of just nothing changing. I mean, that could happen, what we just saw in that video in 2024 is just incredible. It absolutely is incredible.
Yeah, it's absolutely incredible. It's absolutely disgusting. Orange G says his brother is a cop, and he says that they have two buttons, and the audio and video take at least 2 minutes to shut off. So that's interesting. Wow. But you would think, again, to your point, though, with all the things that we've seen over the years on video, we talked about George Floyd and so many others, that we would see less of this, but it seems like we're not. We're seeing more.
And not only are we not seeing less of it, we're seeing more of it on video. That seems to be the big change. Remember, Black Lives Matter thought that the video camera was going to be the thing that was going to moderate people's behavior. Well, it turns out not only has it not moderated people's behavior, it's just given us a close-up view of people getting murdered. So, I mean, I'm amazed that you know, it's so deep in the ether of the culture of some of these police forces that they don't see this as problematic. I mean, they don't appear to see this as problematic at all. So that right there should tell you something. I always thought it was interesting too during the debate on qualified immunity, and I'm not a big fan of the idea of people having to bear civil responsibility for what could be defined as something that is part of their job. Okay, so I understood why the police were against that, and I thought they had some pretty good reasons to be against it, because effectively they do have a license to kill. They do have a license to be physical with people in certain situations. Okay. It was interesting to watch some police effectively quit upon hearing that they might be held responsible
Right.
for behavior that is really outside of the code of conduct for most police departments. And I said to myself, well, wait a minute, if you're quitting over that, then what type of conduct are you engaged in? Because most cops do not have to unholster their gun on a daily basis like we see on TV. Most cops are not performing police brutality. If you look at the statistics, we have like 600,000 or 700,000 sworn law enforcement officers in the country, and most of them are not involved in this type of behavior. So what are you worried about if you're not involved in that type of behavior? But there's this sort of an unspoken thing there of, I think I should be able to do whatever the heck I want to whomever I want. And if I can't do that, I guess I can't be a cop. Like that. That's an interesting part about policing culture.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, as Orange G says, even with audio and video, they don't care. Ahmaud Arbery was lynched in Georgia. They show the video to their friends, and that's what got them caught. Showing off that video. Trixie says, "I'm going to say something very harsh, but unfortunately true. They still think of Black people as 3/5 of a human, which is completely sad. And in some cases, they don't even think of them with that. They don't think as much of Black people as even that, the 3/5 thing." Um, that's just where things are. Here's something that's I found to be very interesting. Folks, we talked about some folks expressing so-called buyer's remorse with Donald Trump already. But check this out, Lauren, a stat that you probably are very much aware of: 4 in 5 of those taking part in Obama. In fact, I think you sent me something on this, or sent the group something on this. 4 in 5 of those taking part in Obamacare in 2025 are from states which voted for Donald Trump, indicating that he risks backlash from his own base if he does take aim at Obamacare. And according to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, more than 3 million Americans, including around 500,000 new customers, signed up for coverage through the health insurance marketplace established by Obamacare between November 1st and November 22nd. And a majority of these 3 million, Lauren, come from Florida and Texas, followed by California with over 280,000 applications. So more than 3 million people who indicated that they will participate in Obamacare, and 82% of these people live in states which voted for Trump over Vice President Harris.
Yeah, well, so that makes sense because, of course, those southern states, the poorest states in the country, Mississippi, Alabama, Kentucky, et cetera, and so on, are in need of some sort of healthcare reform more than anybody else. So it kind of makes sense that some of those states would be involved. Hey, I mean, I don't know what to say. I mean, I think they're going to certainly go after the Affordable Care Act. Obviously, Trump kept talking about it during his first term. He was never actually able to do it. I do think when it comes to pulling the trigger and people start looking at the numbers of people impacted, they start to balk. I mean, they start to realize that this is going to be hugely problematic when you're taking something away from somebody. But the fact remains that I think a lot of the people who actually run the Republican Party right now, who are millionaires and billionaires, they really don't care about what happens to people who are living below the poverty line, which is something like over 40 million people in the United States. Because, in fact, to have the train rolling down the track of constantly having people making decisions based on their healthcare insurance is a huge motivating factor for keeping a lot of these industries running, particularly your, Walmarts and Target and McDonald's and all of the types of things that these moneyed interests would run. You kind of need people to be desperate, to say to themselves, I have to take this job because I need health insurance. So we've tethered, as everybody knows, we've typically tethered the health insurance to your employment. And once you've done that, it puts a lot of leverage on an individual employee not to leave because they need that health insurance and usually family coverage as well.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Why, back in 2016 when he was president, when he won president, Trump he kept talking about cutting Obamacare. Why haven't they been successful in getting rid of it, Lauren?
Because there's too many people on it, Republican and Democrat, black and white, who are using it, and Medicaid expansion and the whole thing, dismantling all of that is putting in jeopardy the healthcare of millions and millions of people. It's a hard argument to make because effectively the question is, why are you doing it? And then, of course, the other problem was they had nothing to replace it with. So President Trump in his first term never articulated what exactly he was going to replace it with. And I would assume that he would replace it with absolutely nothing. in which case everybody would notice that you just eliminated my health care, you know. So that whole thing is problematic. They don't have any policy behind what they're saying. They're just talking. It's just a lot of talking, you know. And so I do think that I don't know where that's headed. I don't think they have the votes. The House is too close for them, I think, to have votes to actually do it, because you just have too many people in these very close seats, and they get it into their head. You know, the first thing in these members of Congress, their first priority is reelection. So,
Right.
you know, and their own health care, right? So if you're a member of Congress, you're getting covered by the health care you're trying to eliminate from others. And if you're only in 2 years, you're not vested. So there's that. I mean, I just think it's that they don't have the votes, but we'll see what happens. They're you know, again, we have a situation, we have an oligarchy in this country where we have a bunch of rich people who are about to run the country. And those rich people don't generally care or have the same experiences as the 40 million Americans at the bottom of the economic spectrum who are in need of health care.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting these 4 years coming up. Brace yourself.
Yeah.
Here's something else, Lauren, that really has gotten social media uh, in an uproar. And in fact, RNG on the SWAC network last night, his SWAC sports show was talking about this as well. The RNG SWAC sports, Mississippi Valley State University and HBCU, the marching band has launched a fundraiser to perform during Trump's inauguration in January. The Mean Green Marching Machine received and accepted an invitation to participate in the 60th presidential inauguration parade, which happens to fall on January 20th, which is Martin Luther King Jr. Day. It would be the band's second presidential inauguration performance, the last one being for former President Richard Nixon. However, the band needs about $350,000 to get to the nation's capital. And so to help generate these funds, they've launched a GoFundMe, and so far it has raised about $60,000, a little bit more than $60,000. The university said that they are ecstatic about its marching band performing in the inauguration. But some of the blowback. One HBCU graduate said, "This is the most dishonorable thing I have ever read. It's a slap in the face to our culture, history, and values." And there's so much of that. Why? First of all, you've been invited to do something. Why does it cost you? You was invited. I'm having like an anniversary party, for instance, right? Why would I charge people to come to what's something I invited them to?
So who's charging them?
Well, that's a good question. We talked about that, I believe yesterday, or at least recently. All of the money that they are charging the Trump folks are charging folks to be a part of this inauguration and to
Isn't
go to these events afterwards. When really we know that the event itself is put on by the inauguration committee, and it's free.
right?
But this is the cost of doing business, I guess. Now, it's not just Donald Trump, right? Let's be fair. Others have paid to ingratiate themselves with the president, but to be a part of that celebration. But this is kind of crazy.
Yeah, I get it. I think for the 4th of July parade also, when bands are invited, of course they have to pay their way. Macy's, I'm sure they have to pay their way, you know. It does sound a lot. I mean, I don't know how many pieces they have in their band. It's probably a big band, but and I don't know whether they're spending a night. I assume that they are, which is probably the bulk of this $300,000.
$350,000?
Yeah, that's a lot of money. That's over $250,000 for what is really a 1-day event. Okay, so that's what. But I get, you know, I think it would be logistically difficult to put everybody on a bus, drive up in 1 day, get off the bus, march, get back on the bus, and drive back down in one 24-hour cycle. So without knowing the logistics, that may in fact be the expense, and it may not be that exorbitant if I actually look at the details.
Well,
Um,
you know what? What's interesting is Now, I don't know, was this because there was the potential of Kamala Harris winning the election and becoming the first woman, first Black woman, et cetera. But when we were checking rates back in the summertime for the inauguration in DC, hotels that generally, I mean,
Right,
Motel 6 was going for
right,
$1,200 a night
right,
for
right.
the inauguration. So that first of all, I wouldn't be caught anyway. I mean, not Motel 6 might decide to sponsor us.
Ah, right,
No, but the thing about it is, so a Holiday Inn, 2,000 a night.
right. No, I get it. I've seen so many inaugural. It's why I keep a small place in DC that's very cheap for this very reason, and thank goodness friends in Arlington and elsewhere are nearby, but I do think it's interesting that the band is playing. I actually don't have any particular problem with that. I mean, as long as you know who you are when you step into a space and what you represent, I don't have any problem with the band playing. Kind of reminds me when I was consulting Justin Fairfax in 2019, we had the 400-year anniversary of 1619, the 400-year anniversary of the government of Virginia. Donald Trump was president. He shows up in Williamsburg, and we knew far in advance that he was going to show up in Williamsburg for this commemoration. And they had the whole, regalia of everything out there that you would think for an anniversary of a 400-year anniversary of the government, Virginia. And of course, for Black people, 1619 represents slaves coming to Virginia at Fort Comfort, at Fort Monroe. And there was a big debate in the Virginia legislature about whether or not members should show up and whether or not the lieutenant governor should show up. You have a Black lieutenant governor who, of course, would be sitting on the dais right next to President Trump. In terms of when the president enters the dais, he shakes hands with everybody. I mean, and my view of it was our ancestors should hold a place at that event and not be driven out by anybody or anything. We are pushed out of history. We are ignored. People love pretending that we don't exist. And this sort of posture of being the Negro by the door and you're just in the background. I think that we need to represent for our ancestors. That should be the posture that we're taking, that we are representing because a lot of people had the view, let's not show up at all, or let's wear all white, or let's protest. We did have one member who did protest President Trump at the 1619 event in Williamsburg, got up and did a protest on immigration. And Ibrahim Samira, who was a former delegate and is a doctor. At any rate, my feeling is don't let anybody drive you out of places where you should be and should have been in the first place. So this kind of feels like that. It's a little different because it is an inauguration. So effectively, it's a celebration of Trump's term in office. A little bit different than a historic commemoration. So you got to think about what that means, how you represent, what you represent, and what you say when you get there.
Well, let me read some of these comments. Daniela Pierre says if he wants them there, he needs to pay for them to be there. But Mike V is more pointed. He says the same folks who want to ban DE&I, divest from HBCUs, want a marching band to come perform for them on Inauguration Day. Unbelievable. David Youngblood says, I will not support that. Austin says, the next generation of Uncle and Aunt Tom's marching. RNG, it was some harsh comments, right? RNG says, my father graduated from Valley. His spirit told me to go off. The band director is MAGA. Bands did this at Talladega College, and the blowback was fierce in 2016. So there's a lot of that, and a lot of Black folks have described this inauguration, some I've seen on social media, as a sort of a glorified Klan rally, among other things. So
Well, gee,
there's
I
a
wonder where
lot
they
of controversy.
Yeah, I wonder where they'd get that idea. I mean, these people violently attacked the US Capitol. They talk incessantly about CRT and anti-DEI. They promote people like Charlie Kirk, who is a racist. They have idiots around like Elon Musk, who is another racist, and Vivek Ramaswamy, who were, now learning. I don't know why this is now suddenly being revealed, that he made his money off of a very dubious drug for Alzheimer's. Why did that not get revealed before? And, this is a dubious cast of characters, to say the least, and particularly with regard to race. As African Americans in this country, we are not surprised. We are not shocked. We have lived with this situation for 400 years. Everybody else, if they want to get shocked, they can get shocked. But we're not the group that gets shocked. We know exactly what the history of this country is. So it's not like, oh my God, these people, wow. I mean, we've been dealing with Southern strategy now since 1968. The question is, do you totally withdraw or do you engage? Now, again, an inauguration is different from, like I said, a historic commemoration or something like that, where your ancestors were pushed out, ignored, brutalized, et cetera, and so on, and you're standing in their stead effectively by showing up present day. An inauguration is a celebration of his presidency. I mean, let's be real what this is. So, I mean, I do think, though, they have to be clear in their minds about what they are articulating, if anything, when they get there. Or are they just happy to be there? Because we do have happy to be there syndrome, which tends to come out of the South. And as somebody who was raised in New York, with half of my family raised in the South, I've been particularly expert at recognizing happy to be there syndrome, which kind of has an edge of that, but I really don't know the people involved, so I can't tell.
Is that contagious, Lauren?
Thankfully, it's not contagious. But we, again, we African Americans have a good reason to be extremely cautious about how we move in this world. I mean, it's never surprising to me that people make different choices. Not everybody can be Malcolm X. Not everybody can be, Martin Luther King. I mean, people have different choices about how they engage with a society that has historically been antagonistic against the group that you belong to. It is a lifelong question for African Americans in this country.
Well, let's do some year in review stuff. Well, first of all, let's look at this
Fight
video.
brewing in the National Archives over the telling of American history. For the past year, the country's top archivist and her team have been removing some references to negative parts of American history from exhibits planned to open in 2025. Colleen Shogan and her team have raised concerns that the planned exhibits might anger Republican lawmakers and a potential Trump administration. I'm an investigative reporter for the Wall Street Journal, and my colleague and I spoke to nearly a dozen current and former archives employees, and we reviewed documents and contemporaneous notes for this story. Here are some of the changes that head archivist Colleen Shogan and her team ordered to these exhibits. They removed prominent references to events like the World War II Japanese-American incarceration camps because they were too negative and controversial. And they requested to swap a photo of Martin Luther King Jr. marching for civil rights for former President Nixon greeting Elvis. They also removed several documents related to the U.S. government's displacement of Native American tribes from a planned exhibit about westward expansion. Shogun asked one staffer, "Why is it so much about Indians?" Longtime employees at the National Archives have said her efforts amounted to censorship, and at least a half dozen senior employees have stepped down in recent months. When we asked for comment, the National Archives told us that it's committed to operating without ideology or partisanship. There's a fight brewing in the National Archives.
Well, in 2024, Black Americans, Lauren, encountered a series of political events that tested their resilience and commitment to justice, from court rulings affecting civil rights to landmark political milestones. 2024 was definitely a year of challenges and pivotal achievements. Of course, Vice President Harris made history as the first Black woman to lead a major party's presidential ticket, but it was so much. What was the story for you, or stories for you, in 2024, Lauren, as far as as far as Black America is concerned and the political landscape?
Well, I thought the story of the year was Vice President Harris, really, and the fact that she was in an unfortunate position to have to run a 107-day presidential campaign, a never before seen situation, which really kind of starts on July 27, 2024, when President Biden and his staff thought it was a good idea to debate Donald Trump in the condition that he was in. And there's so many people to blame here, and I'm going to name them. Jen O'Malley Dillon, Anita Dunn. These people could not possibly not know that President Biden was not ready for prime time, as it were. And I have no idea why they're trying to pretend that they somehow sent him out there and it was all an accident and a mistake. I mean, you knew what this was. This man came in to office, I believe, at 78 years old. Should have been a surprise to absolutely nobody that you know, he was going to at some point start to show his age. But that, of course, set up a situation 24 days later where the sitting vice president, Kamala Harris, I don't want to say forced into duty, because you do what you want to do in the end of the day, but I'm not sure what the alternative was on July 21 when Joe Biden announces that he is not running. All of these things, by the way, are completely unprecedented. And when I see people online, you know, bitching about how the vice president didn't do very well and she didn't do this and she didn't do that, the vice president was in an impossible situation, as anybody else would have been, whether it was Josh Shapiro or the governor of California or the man on the moon, running a 107-day presidential campaign against somebody who had been running for president for 4 years on his third presidential run is difficult. And one might notice that it was still close on the popular vote. Of course, Trump lost the popular vote to Hillary Clinton in 2016 by 2.8 million votes. And then he lost the popular vote again and the election to Joe Biden by 8 million votes. I'm sorry, 2.8 million votes for Hillary, 8 million more for Joe Biden in 2020. And finally, he wins the popular vote on his third try. So there was a good reason to believe that Harris could pull it off. But a very difficult situation. And Thomas Donnellan and these people in the White House are should be held completely accountable for these decisions, because this decision is now going, you know, is of course prompting another 2 picks on the Supreme Court, which Donald Trump is certain to get. Alito is, I would say, almost certain to resign or retire, as is Clarence Thomas. So now we have Donald Trump with 5 Supreme Court picks. And that is because of stupid decision making on the part of some of these Democrats sitting up in the White House advising the president. And I can't escape saying it, a stupid decision by the sitting president to announce that he was going to run again.
Well, and you can couple that too with these the fact that Benny Thompson and Liz Cheney and the January 6th committee did their job and carried the water for the DOJ, who did not act in a timely manner.
Speaking of stupid decisions, probably the worst decision of Biden's presidency is who he picked at Attorney General. Because he had 2 other picks that I'm not sure why the hell that didn't happen, particularly with regard to Doug Jones. The other rumor was Javier Becerra, who ended up at Health and Human Services. The other rumor, I'm not sure how deep the rumor is. I did read Melissa DeRosa's book, who was a close aide to Andrew Cuomo. She doesn't seem to indicate in the book that this was a real rumor, but I remember hearing the rumor that Andrew Cuomo was another possible pick for AG. Who,
I remember that too.
Yeah, in my view, would have been the perfect personality to deal with all of these things that happen next. But for some reason, the Democratic Party is more interested in assuming that people are telling the truth based on gender, right? And destroying and eating their own, including Andrew Cuomo and Al Franken, and of course, Justin Fairfax. Then they are, say,
you see that headline?
Right. And and it was a huge mistake. Merrick Garland was clearly the wrong person. This crazy idiot view that they owed him something because he didn't get on the Supreme Court was ridiculous. It was ridiculous when President Obama picked Merrick Garland for Supreme Court. And I know he's trying to appease Mitch McConnell. It doesn't work that way. And until the Democrats figure out that they've got to fight these people in the same way that these Republicans fight them, they're going to continue to lose. They're trying to appease these Republicans. It doesn't work that way. Mitch McConnell didn't say, oh, wow, it's Merrick Garland. He's pretty moderate. Let's put him on the Supreme Court. They didn't say that. They fought him against him anyway. I mean, it doesn't matter. And then they reward Merrick Garland, who is the wrong personality. He might be the nicest guy in the world, and he might be, qualified on paper, which I'm sure he is. He's the wrong personality for the times that we live in. A little bit like the Jerry Connolly decision that we just watched with the House Dems. Although Jerry Connolly is a very good communicator, it's not about Jerry Connolly. He actually is very good on TV. He's a very good communicator, but he's not as good as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She's on another level, and she's perfect for the times that we live in and the communications age that we live in. So it's not about Jerry Connolly. It's just about, you've got somebody sitting there with 8 million followers on Instagram, and you say to yourself, nah, we don't want to use this person. I mean, that makes no sense to me. And this Merrick Garland thing was an absolute disaster. And they knew coming into office
to see that it would be.
Right. They
That's
knew
the
coming into
problem.
office. Right. They knew before anything happened, before Inauguration Day, what was going to happen coming into office. And they picked Merrick Garland. And there's no excuse for that decision. It was one of the worst of Biden's presidency.
They knew, like you said, they knew January 6th had happened. They knew that there needed to be someone in that office who, like a Cuomo at the time, who could who had the chops to do his
Mhm.
job. Garland actually sat on the sidelines for a long time as Benny Thompson and Liz Cheney and the rest of them did his job in that
Yeah.
investigation. And
Right.
that's just
He doesn't have the guts. Some people just don't have the guts. They're not made for this. They're not built for this. And Merrick Garland is that guy that's not built for this. It should not have been hard to figure that out. It needed somebody. I mean, Doug Jones would have been fine. Andrew Cuomo would have been perfect. You need somebody with an aggressive personality. Andrew Cuomo grew up in New York with Donald Trump. I mean, Andrew Cuomo is not scared of Donald Trump. He would have been the perfect person for this in so many ways. But I mean, there's other people as well, I'm sure, that are out there. And
but
the
it all
Democrat.
falls back in the
Mhm.
laps of Joe Biden.
Oh, no, absolutely. Well, I do think that Steve Ricchetti and Thomas Donnellan and people's advisors do matter. I don't like to necessarily blame staff because you're right, it is the principle. But when you're the president of the United States, you got a lot of decisions in front of you, a lot more than any other elected official. You really do rely on staff. Staff being in your ear does matter, you know. And these people, Steve Ricchetti and Tom Donnellan, have been with Joe Biden for decades. I mean, you know who he is at this point. I don't know that we can say the same thing about Jen O'Malley Dillon and Anita Dunn. I don't think they were with Biden as for as long as Steve Ricchetti and Tom Donnellan. But come on, guys, get real, you know. And so I think these were obviously terrible decisions. And I don't know what was the argument. The argument was we had to pick Merrick Garland because we felt sorry for him because he didn't get on the Supreme Court. What was the argument for Merrick Garland? I could never figure that out. It was a huge mistake.
Because
A
there is no
consequential
argument.
mistake.
There is no sound argument anyway.
Mhm.
An absolutely unmitigated disaster, and now you're in a predicament that you created. So there is that. Lauren, one of the biggest stories of the year turned out to be Cat Williams. The Vibe noted that
Yeah.
in ways large and small, Cat set the tone. His Club Shay Shay session with Shannon Sharp was an unofficial run for, they said, HNIC, head Negro in charge, if you will. Cat set the agenda. When you look back on that, I mean, it wasn't supposed to be such a seminal moment, right? But I mean, it turned out to be. It was absolutely amazing to say the least. It's words can't even come to the exact order it needs to when describing the tone Cat Williams set for 2024.
Yeah, well, to me, what it really represented was the official end of legacy media, because
Yes.
effectively what's happening there is that Shannon Sharp has created a platform that has far surpassed the numbers of any legacy media platform that I can think of. And it's just not just about cord cutting, it's about what type of content people actually like and enjoy watching. What's so interesting about it is that in so many cases, particularly for podcasting and Joe Rogan and everything else, we're seeing comedians specifically do very well cross platform and
Mhm.
cross subject matter. So, you know, you see comedians and Bill Maher is the other one that I think about where, you know, he's got this platform and people are watching. Okay. Well, Cat Williams and Shannon Sharp, though, the numbers were on a completely different stratospheric level, to where Shannon Sharp really doesn't need anybody or anything to roll forward with whatever content he wants to. And of course, he has the other show, Nightcap, with Chad Ojocinco, which is incredibly entertaining.
Yeah.
So you're melding sports, entertainment, and in the case of Cat Williams, a really talented comedian, all in one thing. And he's just knowledgeable enough to be able to speak on the insider world of the entertainment industry and on topics that aren't entertainment industry related in a way that really is what we say in politics. You know, he put it where the goats can get it. You know, he talks on a level that is the way real people talk, whether they're sitting in their living room, in their bar, or whatever. Katt Williams talks on that level, you know, and is not afraid to share his views on things. And he's been in the industry for so long that people really leaned in, because it was like, wow, this guy, he has been in the industry. He has had the vantage point that that you would say to yourself, he would know what he was talking about, and he wasn't afraid to share that. And what
Yeah.
happens is an explosive amount of viewership and engagement. And I think that
Yeah.
to me, it represents new media triumphing over old legacy media.
Well, we saw that even during the presidential campaign, where you know, legacy media in general, were pretty much left out of even the advertising. They went to these podcasters and folks like that. But everybody has their own platform now. Celebrities galore have their own platform. Ordinary people have their own platform. You're right. It's just things are different, and the Cat Williams Shannon Sharp interview really put the cap on it. If you had any doubts about where things were headed media wise, like you said, that was the one that did it. I mean, the incisiveness and precision with which Cat carved up his competition is just unmatched, and it was just so eye opening, and people were just stunned at his what appeared to be just his straight up honesty.
Yeah, well, that's because it's so rare. It's actually one of the reasons, and I know it's hard for a lot of people to admit, but it is one of the reasons why Donald Trump does so well with a lot of people in the country, because he's breaking fourth wall and saying things that you're not supposed to say and off the top of his head. And so he's petty, he's stupid, he's smart, he's this, he's that, he's all of these things mixed in. He's outrageous, you know. He's talking on this sort of very you know, no BS level of I'm just going to say anything that comes to my mind. And of course, Katt was doing that as well. But that is the reason that's the new competition is that because of YouTube primarily, and I think TikTok as well, even though I know TikTok is you know, could get banned on the 19th, but TikTok is a real example of how it's so easy for anybody who is smart and who can communicate to have their own platform. And we see a lot of people, particularly on TikTok, that we've never heard of, put together a 2-minute video or a 3-minute video that has a high degree of communication and information attached to it, and blow up and go viral. And it's very easy to do on TikTok if you just have a more than third or fourth grade level of intelligence. It's a little bit harder to do on YouTube. You need YouTube. You need a little bit of strategery with regard to your thumbnails and your titles and all that. But you can do it on YouTube as well. It just takes a little bit longer. And that to me is, I think the media people need to really wake up to the fact that this is your competition. You're competing against everybody who has any sort of platform. I don't care whether they have a platform or not, whether they have a press pass or not, whether they go into a big building on 8th Avenue or K Street in Washington, D.C. or not. This is who you're competing against.
Yeah. Well, also, celebrity deaths this year. We just been adding to it. Greg Gumbel, Ricky Henderson, of course, Nikki Giovanni, Alpha Anderson. Uh, Quincy Jones was this year. DJ Clark Kent, Cissy Houston, John Amos, Dikembe Mutombo, Dancer Cat Glover, Tito Jackson, Frankie Beverly, James Earl Jones, Fat Man Scoop. We go on and on. It was a huge, huge year of loss. Willie Mays, Angela Bofield, O.J. Simpson, Lou Gossett Jr., Carl Weathers, DJ Mr. C. Some of the biggest losses. Anything surprised you, Lauren, in any way?
I think the most shocking death of the year is actually one of the most shocking deaths. A lot of those people were older. We're not necessarily surprised. I mean, James Earl Jones, I was, you know, bracing myself for the day we're going to hear that, and Quincy Jones. But I think certainly Liam Payne's death was a surprise to everybody. I don't know that people were expecting Liam Payne to die, particularly the way that he died. I think that was a big shock to a lot of people. We knew that Shannon Doherty had cancer, but Shannon Doherty seemed to have turned some sort of corner, and then she passes away. And she's a Gen Xer, and I think, certainly Luke Perry, I think, died in 2020. Anybody who watched Beverly Hills 90210 was probably like, wow, these people are dying fairly young. I think both of them are under 60. But at any rate, it was a huge thing, kind of made you remember the Louis Gossett Jr. thing, made me go back and look at the clips from Officer and a Gentleman, because he
Yeah.
was outstanding in that. And, it just makes you think about the moments that these people gave us, a lot of whom gave it to us on screen. And, in a special thing, Louis Gossett, of course, won the Academy Award. Yes, it's amazing. But I mean, a big one there, of course, is Quincy Jones, who was involved in so much of the good music that we have heard for the last 30 years. Quincy Jones had an unbelievable career. It starts out with hanging out with Ray Charles. And I mean, it's crazy. I mean, it's really a crazy career, and producing all sorts of musicians and hanging out with Frank Sinatra and this and that. And of course, Michael Jackson. So unbelievable. I wonder where all his stuff goes. They're probably going to have a Quincy Jones museum, because he's just got too much stuff. It's kind of like the Prince situation. The Prince had so much stuff, and they kind of are making his house into a museum slowly. So I was like, it's just crazy when you think about some of the achievement these people have in relatively short periods of time.
Real side note, or is connected, but I forget who it was. It was just a couple of days ago. Someone died, and gosh, it wasn't Carter, but nonetheless, I was reading this about them dying. It was just happened, and at the bottom of the article, it was written by what's his name at the Associated Press, did the Cosby trial with him and other trials with him. I don't know why his name is escaping me, but nonetheless, at the end of the article, it said that this obituary was written by such and such in 2020. And I thought, that's old school journalism. I remember working at newspapers like the LA Times and the LA Daily News, and we would, and people might find it kind of morbid, but it's not. When someone is of stature or fame, some sort is getting older, or have been sick, or has been sick, you do prepare, especially if it's like a Michael Jackson. If it's like a Quincy Jones, you prepare for it. You want to make sure that you are prepared to publish that death, right? And I just thought that's old school, that they had this prepared. And I forget who it was about. I don't know why it's escaping. It could have been Carter. 20, I think it was Jimmy Carter, in fact, that they wrote his obituary for the most part in 2020.
Well, he
This is what
was,
we used to do.
yeah, I mean, Jimmy Carter had been rumored. Remember I think it was his nephew or his grandson, Chip Carter, kept misreporting that
Yes.
Jimmy Carter had passed away. It happened, I think, twice.
Twice.
And,
Yeah.
so everybody got on high alert. As you could see, MSNBC and CNN rolled a reel right as the news came out. So obviously they had plenty of time to put together the reel. And there's no point in waiting around for it to happen to do that, and particularly for a life like Jimmy Carter, which has like 3 major chapters: the part 1, so the World War II chapter, then he has the gubernatorial chapter, a presidential chapter, and then an after presidency chapter, which a lot of people argue was his best chapter. So you got a lot to compile when you talk about Jimmy Carter. I mean, this is not somebody who just did one thing, like became governor, became president for 4 years, and then that was it. And then he had some pretty extraordinary things packed in the 4 years. All that Middle Eastern stuff, and we're sitting here watching the Middle East blow up all the time. And Jimmy Carter actually got all those parties to the table for once. I think effectively the only one to do it. And so that right there is a huge thing. And he was only there for 4 years. But that's definitely an obit that's pre-written. There's a lot of those things that are pre-written, and there's a few stories in journalism where people have hit the button by mistake. on pre-written
Yeah. Oh,
obits.
hey.
And so, but I
Absolutely.
get it. I mean, it's hard to, for his life particularly, it's very hard to be compiling that in a 2-hour period or something like that.
Yeah. And Bison for Life, we thank you. He says, Bison for Life says, let it be known in 2024 became my morning staple and the need of Black-owned news media. And don't forget Black Virginia News. You gotta
Yeah.
subscribe, y'all. You gotta subscribe. Lauren's doing some yeoman's work over there with Black Virginia News. We appreciate you, Lauren. And we looking forward to some more insight from you in 2025. Thanks for joining us, Lauren.
Thanks a lot. Great to be here, and I'll see you soon.
We'll see you all next year.